My husband missed the birth of our son. The game went into overtime, he texted. His sister said, some people are too dramatic about labor. I held my baby alone. Until the nurse walked in carrying a small locked box. Someone told me to give you this, if he didn't show. The pregnancy test trembled in my hands like a leaf in winter wind. 2 pink lines stared back at me, bold and undeniable. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pressed my palm against my still flat stomach, imagining the tiny life growing inside. This was it, the moment I'd dreamed about since I was a little girl playing with dolls. I burst through the bathroom door, test clutched in my fist like a winning lottery ticket. Andrew. I called out, my voice cracking with excitement. Andrew, come here. You have to see this. He looked up from his phone, annoyed at the interruption. His eyes flicked to the test, then back to his screen. Okay, he said like I just told him we were out of milk. That's something. Something? My world had just shifted on its axis and he called it something? Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories that matter. If you believe that every woman deserves unwavering support during the most vulnerable moments of her life, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more mothers who need to hear this. Now let's see how this powerful story unfolds. The silence that followed felt like ice forming in my veins. I waited for him to jump up, to spin me around, to call his family. Instead, he scrolled through whatever was more important on his phone. The joy that had been bubbling in my chest began to deflate, slow and painful. Aren't you excited? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Sure, babe. Just processing. He didn't even look at me. That night, I lay awake planning our announcement. Maybe a cute photo with baby shoes? Or a cake with the words, coming soon, written in frosting. I imagined the squeals of delight, the congratulatory hugs, the immediate planning for baby showers and nursery colors. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of tiny fingers and first steps. The first doctor's appointment arrived like Christmas morning in my mind. I'd taken time off work, bought a special notebook to record everything the doctor said. I even packed snacks for Andrew, knowing he got cranky when he was hungry. He never showed up. I sat in that sterile waiting room, surrounded by glowing couples holding hands, my phone buzzing with his excuses. Emergency meeting came up. You'll be fine. Just get the basic info. The nurse called my name and I walked into that examination room alone. Dr. Martinez smiled warmly as she squirted cold gel on my stomach, but her eyes kept darting to the empty chair beside me. Where's Daddy today? She asked gently. Work emergency, I lied, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. The heartbeat filled the room, fast, strong, determined. I stared at the grainy ultrasound image, trying to make out a nose or tiny fingers, and felt tears streaming down my cheeks. This was supposed to be our moment. Instead, I was sharing it with a kind stranger who handed me tissues and pretended not to notice my wedding ring. That evening, I showed Andrew the ultrasound photos with shaking hands. He glanced at them for maybe 3 seconds before setting them on the kitchen counter next to junk mail and grocery store flyers. Cool, he said. Looks like a blob. Our baby. A blob. The second appointment came and went the same way. Then the third. Each time, Andrew had a more elaborate excuse. Client presentation. Boss called an emergency meeting. Traffic was insane. I stopped asking him to come. The disappointment was becoming too heavy to carry. Family dinners became exercises in survival. Every Sunday at Penelope's house, I'd sit at that oversized dining table, my hand instinctively moving to my growing belly, hoping someone would notice. Ask questions. Show excitement. Instead, I got stares. Penelope's eyes would narrow whenever she looked at me, like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Violet would whisper something in her ear, and they'd both glance my way with expressions I couldn't quite read. Pity? Disgust? Disapproval? You look tired, Penelope said one evening, her voice dripping with false concern. Are you taking care of yourself? I'm fine, I replied, forcing a smile. Just the usual pregnancy stuff. Pregnancy stuff, she repeated as if tasting something sour. You know, some people aren't cut out for motherhood. It's nothing to be ashamed of. The words hit me like a physical blow. Violet nodded sagely from across the table, her mouth forming a thin line of agreement. I think I'll be a good mother, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Penelope leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the tablecloth. Sweetie, you can barely manage your own life. You called in sick 3 times last month. You cry at commercials. Are you sure this baby is a good idea? The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Andrew said nothing. He didn't defend me, didn't tell his sister to back off. He just cut his steak and chewed slowly as if the conversation didn't concern him. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried until my eyes were swollen and red. When I returned, they were discussing vacation plans for next summer. Plans that apparently didn't include accommodating a newborn. The worst part was watching Andrew with Aria's children. Every weekend he'd transform into this amazing uncle figure. He'd arrive at her house with bags full of toys and treats, his face lighting up the moment those kids ran to him. He'd spend hours teaching them to throw a football, helping with homework, building elaborate pillow forts. Uncle Andrew is the best, 7-year-old Mason would shriek, launching himself into Andrew's arms. I'd watch from the kitchen window as Andrew lifted the boy high into the air, both of them laughing until their sides ached. The tenderness in his eyes, the patience in his voice. Where was that energy when I asked if we could start buying baby items? We have time, he'd say whenever I brought up cribs or car seats. Don't be so pushy about it. As if wanting to prepare for our child made me demanding. Aria's house became a shrine to her children. Photos everywhere, artwork covering the refrigerator, toys scattered lovingly across every surface. Our house remained unchanged, as if the pregnancy was something happening to someone else entirely. My own mother's reaction cut the deepest. I'd expected her to be thrilled about becoming a grandmother, to immediately start knitting blankets and planning celebrations. Instead, she treated my pregnancy like an inconvenient phase I was going through. Mom, want to feel the baby kick? I asked during one of our coffee dates, placing her hand on my rounded belly. She pulled away as if I'd burned her. That's okay, dear. I'm sure it's nice. Nice. My child's first movements were nice. When I brought up potential names, she'd suddenly remember something urgent she needed to discuss about her book club or the neighbors. When I mentioned being scared about labor, she'd wave her hand dismissively. You're being dramatic as usual. Women have been having babies for thousands of years. You'll figure it out. Dramatic. The word followed me everywhere, an invisible scarlet letter that made me question every emotion, every concern, every moment of joy I dared to feel. The isolation was suffocating. I'd scroll through social media watching other pregnant women surrounded by supportive families, elaborate baby showers, partners who seemed genuinely excited. The contrast made my chest ache with a loneliness so profound it felt like drowning. Then there was Chelsea. She didn't make grand gestures or offer unsolicited advice. She simply showed up. When I texted that I had another ultrasound appointment, she took time off work without being asked. When morning sickness left me unable to eat anything but crackers, she appeared at my door with homemade soup and ginger tea. You don't have to do this, I told her one afternoon as she folded tiny clothes I'd secretly bought for the baby. I know, she said simply. I want to. She was the only one who asked how I was feeling and actually waited for an answer. The only one who touched my belly with reverence instead of obligation. The only one who understood that this pregnancy wasn't just about the baby. It was about me becoming a mother, scared and excited and desperately in need of support. Those quiet moments with Chelsea became my lifeline, the only evidence that my joy mattered to someone. While everyone else wished away my pregnancy, she helped me embrace it, one gentle gesture at a time. The pain hit me at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, ripping through my lower back like lightning splitting a tree. I'd been lying in bed, one hand resting on my swollen belly, listening to Andrew's steady breathing beside me. The contraction lasted 30 seconds. I counted every single one, before releasing its grip and leaving me gasping. Andrew, I whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. I think it's starting. He mumbled something incoherent and rolled away from me. The second contraction came 12 minutes later, stronger this time, wrapping around my entire midsection like a vice. I gripped the bedsheets and breathed through it the way we'd practiced in those classes I attended alone. By 1:15 a.m., they were coming every 8 minutes. I sat on the edge of our bed, timing each wave with the stopwatch on my phone, my hands trembling as I finally accepted what was happening. This was it. After 9 months of being ignored, dismissed, and wished away, my baby was ready to make his entrance. Andrew. I said louder, my voice cracking with urgency. The contractions are regular. We need to go to the hospital. He cracked one eye open, squinting at me in the darkness. Are you sure? First babies usually take forever. Can't this wait until morning? Another contraction seized me before I could answer, forcing me to my feet and into a swaying motion that seemed to help with the pain. When it passed, I was crying. I'm sure, I whispered. Please. He sighed dramatically, the sound of a man being asked to perform the most unreasonable task imaginable. Fine. Let me get dressed. While he moved with the urgency of someone heading to a dentist appointment, I called the list of numbers I'd carefully programmed into my phone months ago. The family members who were supposed to care. The people who should be racing to witness this miracle. Andrew's phone buzzed with my text. His response came immediately. Game went into overtime. I stared at those 4 words until they blurred together. Not, I love you. Not, I'm coming. Not even good luck. Just an excuse about a basketball game that mattered more than the birth of his son. My fingers shook as I scrolled to the next number. Penelope. Surely she'd want to be here for her nephew's arrival despite everything. The call went straight to voicemail. Her voice, crisp and professional. You've reached Penelope. Leave a message. Penelope, it's me. I'm in labor. We're heading to the hospital now. I thought. I hoped you'd want to be there. My voice broke on the last word. Violet's phone rang 6 times before cutting to voicemail. Zach's did the same. Ella's went straight to the automated message. Even Arya, Andrew's sister who lived 20 minutes away, didn't answer. By 3:30 a.m. I was in a hospital bed, wearing a thin gown that made me feel exposed and vulnerable. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow. Andrew had reluctantly driven me there, then immediately found the most comfortable chair in the corner and dozed off. First baby? Asked Nurse Patricia, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands. Yes, I managed between contractions which were now coming every 5 minutes. Where's your family? Your mom? Sisters. I glanced at Andrew's sleeping form, then at my phone, which showed 0 missed calls and 0 new messages. They're busy tonight. Patricia's expression softened with understanding. She'd probably seen this before. Women laboring alone while their support systems failed them. She squeezed my hand briefly before checking my progress. 4 centimeters, she announced. You're doing great, honey. The hours crawled by with mechanical precision. Contractions came and went like ocean waves, each one stronger than the last. I breathed through them, gripped the bed rails and watched the door hopefully every time footsteps echoed in the hallway. Surely someone would come. Surely Andrew would wake up and realize the magnitude of what was happening. Surely my phone would ring with frantic apologies and promises to rush right over. Instead, the silence stretched endlessly, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and Andrew's occasional snore. At 6:45 a.m., my water broke with a gush that soaked the sheets and sent a fresh wave of panic through my chest. The contractions became relentless, giving me barely 30 seconds between each crushing wave. Andrew. I called out, my voice hoarse from hours of controlled breathing. Andrew, wake up. He stirred, rubbing his eyes. What time is it? The baby's coming. Really coming. Call your family. He fumbled for his phone, squinting at the screen. The game ended at 2 a.m. They're probably all asleep. While I was bringing his child into the world, they were all asleep. That's when I heard running footsteps in the hallway, rapid, determined, getting closer. My heart leaped with desperate hope. Finally, someone had come. Chelsea burst through the door like a hurricane, her hair plastered to her head from the downpour outside, her jacket dripping puddles onto the sterile floor. Her eyes were wild with worry and exhaustion, like she'd been driving through the night. I'm sorry, she gasped, rushing to my bedside. I came as soon as I got your message. Traffic was horrible and then I couldn't find parking and... You came, I sobbed, reaching for her hand. You actually came. She squeezed my fingers tight, her presence immediately filling the emotional void that had been consuming me for hours. Of course I came. I wouldn't miss this for anything. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of pain, exhaustion and Chelsea's steady voice guiding me through each contraction. She wiped my forehead with cool cloths, held my hand when the pain became unbearable, and argued with the nurses when they tried to rush procedures I wasn't ready for. She needs more time, Chelsea insisted when one nurse suggested speeding things along. Let her body do what it needs to do. Andrew woke up occasionally to check his phone or ask if anything had happened yet, then dozed off again like this was just another Tuesday. The contrast between his indifference and Chelsea's fierce advocacy became more stark with each passing hour. At 2:17 p.m. after 14 hours of labor, my son entered the world with a piercing cry that echoed off the hospital walls. Dr. Martinez placed him on my chest, this tiny perfect human being covered in vernix and blood, his eyes squeezed shut as he announced his arrival to anyone who would listen. I looked down at his wrinkled face, his impossibly small fingers, his shock of dark hair, and felt my heart break and heal simultaneously. He was beautiful. He was healthy. He was mine. But the delivery room, which should have been filled with cheers and congratulations and excited phone calls, contained only the medical staff, one sleeping husband, and my best friend who was crying almost as hard as I was. "What's his name?" Nurse Patricia asked gently, preparing the birth certificate. I looked at Andrew, hoping he'd participate in this moment at least. He glanced up from his phone long enough to shrug. "Whatever you want." "James," I whispered, the name I'd been saving in my heart for months. James Andrew. Even after everything, I gave our son his father's name. "Emergency contact?" Patricia continued. I paused, looking around the nearly empty room. At Andrew, who had already returned to his phone. At the door, which remained closed to all the family members who couldn't be bothered to witness this miracle. "Just me," I said finally, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my cheeks. As they cleaned James and weighed him, I counted the silence. No congratulatory calls flooding in. No flower deliveries. No excited relatives demanding to hold their newest family member. Just the quiet beeping of machines and Chelsea's gentle humming as she helped me through the first moments of motherhood. The loneliness felt heavier than the contractions had, settling into my chest like a physical weight I'd carry forever. In that recovery room, holding my perfect son while the world moved on without us, I finally understood the true meaning of being alone. The soft knock barely registered above the steady hum of medical equipment. I was lost in studying James's tiny fingernails, marveling at how perfect they were, when Nurse Patricia opened the door with unusual hesitation. "Excuse me, honey," she said, her voice carrying a strange formality I hadn't heard before. "I have something for you." She held a silver box about the size of a jewelry case, its surface gleaming under the harsh hospital lights. An intricate lock secured the front, and a small brass nameplate caught my eye. The metal felt cool and heavy in my hands, substantial in a way that suggested importance. "This came from a law office downtown," Patricia continued, glancing at Chelsea with obvious curiosity. "The delivery man was very specific. He said to give it to you only if you were alone during your delivery." My heart stuttered. "Alone?" "He had a list of names," she said, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. "He said if any of these people were here with you, I should hold on to this until they left." The paper trembled in my free hand as I unfolded it. There, in neat legal printing, were the names that had haunted my pregnancy. Andrew Mitchell, Penelope Mitchell, Violet Chin, Zachary Ross, Ella Santos, Aria Mitchell. Everyone who should have been here. Everyone who wasn't. "I don't understand," I whispered, looking at the box with growing apprehension. "Who sent this?" Patricia shrugged sympathetically. "The law firm of Henderson and Associates. That's all I know, sweetie." Chelsea moved closer, her eyes fixed on the mysterious container. "Should I?" "Stay," I said quickly. "Please stay." The lock was old-fashioned, requiring a small key that hung from a delicate chain wrapped around the box. My fingers shook as I inserted it, the mechanism clicking with a sound that seemed to echo through the quiet room. The lid opened with a soft creak, revealing burgundy velvet lining that looked expensive and well-maintained. Nestled inside was a thick envelope, sealed with dark red wax that bore an imprint I recognized immediately. "Oh my God," I breathed, nearly dropping the box. It was my father's signet ring impression. The one he'd worn every day of my childhood, the one I'd played with during long car rides, the one that had been buried with him 6 weeks ago. "What is it?" Chelsea asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's from my dad." The words came out strangled, like my throat had forgotten how to work. "But that's impossible." He's been gone for over a month. Jackson Reeves had died suddenly of a heart attack in his sleep, leaving behind a will that seemed straightforward and a daughter who thought she knew everything about his life. Apparently she'd been wrong. Chelsea gently took James from my arms, settling him in the hospital bassinet so I could focus on the envelope. The wax seal cracked under my thumb, releasing the faint scent of the cologne my father had worn, something woody and warm that made my chest ache with longing. The paper inside was thick, expensive stationery with his law firm's letterhead. But the handwriting was unmistakably his, the same careful script that had signed birthday cards and school permission slips throughout my childhood. "My dearest daughter," it began, and I had to stop reading to wipe my eyes. "If you're reading this letter, then my worst fears have come true. You're holding our son, and yes, I know it's a boy. The technician at your 20-week ultrasound was my client's daughter, and you're alone." I looked up at Chelsea, who was rocking James gently while watching me with concern. How could he have known? "Keep reading," she urged softly. "I've watched your husband's family for months now, sweetheart. I've seen how they treat you, how they dismiss your joy, how they make you feel small and unwanted. I hoped I was wrong. I prayed they would prove me wrong when it mattered most." The letter blurred as tears fell onto the paper. My father's voice seemed to fill the room, steady and protective in a way I desperately needed. "If they failed you, if they couldn't be bothered to show up for the most important day of your life, then they don't deserve what I'm about to give you." My hands shook as I turned the page, revealing documents that made my breath catch. Legal papers, property deeds, stock certificates, all bearing my name in bold, official print. The Riverside property on Maple Street. Remember the big house with the wraparound porch that you loved as a child? I bought it 3 years ago. It's worth $1.3 million and it's yours. Free and clear. I nearly dropped the papers. That house had been my favorite when we'd driven through the wealthy neighborhood during my teenage years. I'd pointed it out every time, telling Dad I'd live there someday. He just smiled and said we'd see. The Evergreen Soap Company. You remember how I used to joke about buying it, just for fun, when their stock was cheap? Well, I did. 15% ownership, generating about $80,000 annually in dividends. Also yours. Chelsea leaned over my shoulder, her eyes widening as she scanned the documents. "Are you seeing this?" "There's more," I whispered, turning to the next page. "The trust fund I established contains an additional $400,000 in various investments. Your mother never knew about any of this. I wanted to protect these assets for you specifically. I thought about all the times I'd worried about money during my pregnancy, all the stress about how we'd afford childcare and baby supplies. Meanwhile, my father had been quietly building a fortune to secure my future. But here's the most important part, sweetheart. Anyone who abandoned you during your labor, anyone who proved they cared more about their own convenience than your well-being, is permanently excluded from benefiting from these assets." The next page contained a detailed list. Andrew's name was there, along with specific clauses about spousal property rights being voided due to failure to provide emotional support during childbirth. Penelope, Violet, Zach, Ella, and Aria were all listed as excluded beneficiaries due to absence during grantor's daughter's labor. I had a private investigator confirm that each of these individuals received notification of your due date and labor onset. Their absence was a choice, not an oversight. I looked at Chelsea, who was staring at the papers with her mouth slightly open. "He thought of everything. There's one more thing," I said, noticing another document at the bottom of the envelope. It was a codicil to his will, dated just 2 weeks before his death. In it, he named James as a beneficiary of a separate trust fund containing $200,000, to be accessed when he turned 18. "Your son will never want for anything," the letter continued. "He'll have opportunities that no one can take away from him. And you, my darling girl, will never have to depend on people who don't appreciate your worth." The final paragraph was written in slightly shakier handwriting, as if he'd been emotional while writing it. "I wish I could be there to hold your hand to tell you how proud I am to be the first to hold my grandson. But if I can't be there in person, at least I can be there in spirit, and in the security these gifts will provide. You are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and more loved than they ever made you feel. Your father always, Jackson." I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of grief and gratitude and overwhelming love. My father had seen what I couldn't see, had protected me in ways I never could have imagined. James began to fuss in his bassinet and Chelsea quickly brought him back to me. As I held my son against my chest, surrounded by documents that would change our lives forever, I felt my father's presence as strongly as if he were standing beside me. He'd given me more than money or property. He'd given me proof that I mattered, that my pain had been valid, that my worth wasn't determined by those who'd failed to see it. For the first time since labor began, I wasn't alone. The hospital room door swung open with theatrical timing, as if the universe had orchestrated this moment for maximum impact. Andrew strutted in first, his hair still perfectly styled despite supposedly rushing from wherever he'd been. Behind him, Ella followed with a bouquet of grocery store carnations and a smile that looked practiced in the bathroom mirror. "Baby!" Andrew exclaimed, his voice booming with false enthusiasm. "I'm so sorry we're late. You know how crazy traffic gets downtown." I glanced at the clock on the wall. 4:47 p.m. James had been born over 2 hours ago. The birth certificate lay completed on my bedside table, my signature still drying in the mother section. The father line remained conspicuously blank. "Traffic," I repeated flatly, my voice carrying none of the warmth they expected. Ella rushed forward with her flowers, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. "Oh my goodness, congratulations. I feel terrible we missed everything. I was in the middle of a client meeting when I got the message and then Andrew had to finish up at the office and you know how these things go." "No," I said quietly, cutting through her rambling excuses. "I don't know how these things go." Chelsea moved protectively closer to my bed, the legal documents still clutched in her hands. She'd been helping me organize them when the door burst open, and now she watched Andrew and Ella with the wariness of someone who'd witnessed 14 hours of abandonment. Andrew's gaze swept the room, finally landing on the bassinet where James slept peacefully. His expression shifted into something that might have been wonder or possession. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. "There he is," he breathed, stepping forward with outstretched arms. "Let me hold my son." The word "my" hit me like a physical blow. After everything, the missed appointments, the dismissive comments, the game that went into overtime, he still believed he had the right to claim ownership. I stood slowly, my body still aching from labor, and positioned myself between Andrew and the bassinet. "No." His arms froze mid-reach, confusion flickering across his features. "What do you mean no? He's my baby too." "Is he?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Because fathers usually show up for births. Fathers usually care more about their children than basketball games. Ella shifted uncomfortably, her flowers wilting in the sudden tension. "Come on, don't be like this. We're here now. That's what matters." "We're here now," I repeated, tasting the absurdity of those words. "You missed the most important moment of his life. Of my life. And you think showing up with gas station flowers makes it okay?" Andrew's face hardened, his patience wearing thin. "You're being dramatic. I had responsibilities. You can't expect me to drop everything just because." "Just because what?" My voice rose, all the pain and fury of the past 9 months erupting at once. "Just because your son was being born? Just because your wife needed you?" "You're overreacting," he said, using that familiar dismissive tone that had gaslighted me through months of pregnancy. "Women have babies every day. It's not like you needed me there." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Ella seemed to realize the magnitude of what he'd just said, her face paling as she took a small step backward. Chelsea moved beside me, her jaw set with determination. "Actually, there's something you both need to hear." She held up the legal documents, their official seals catching the fluorescent light. "These arrived today. From Jackson's law firm." Andrew's expression shifted from confusion to suspicion. "What kind of documents?" "The kind that explain exactly what your absence cost you," Chelsea said, her voice steady and clear. She began reading from my father's letter, each word falling into the room like stones into still water. "If you're reading this letter, then my worst fears have come true. You're holding our son and you're alone." Andrew and Ella exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their faces. Chelsea continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. "Anyone who abandoned you during your labor, anyone who proved they cared more about their own convenience than your well-being, is permanently excluded from benefiting from these assets." "Assets?" Ella whispered, sinking into the visitor's chair. The Riverside property worth $1.3 million, Chelsea read. 15% ownership in Evergreen Soap Company. A trust fund containing $400,000. All exclusively in her name. Andrew's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror. That's impossible. The old man never mentioned any of this. He didn't mention it because he knew, I said, finding my voice again. He saw what you all were. He watched you dismiss me, ignore me, hope I'd just disappear. So he made sure I'd never need any of you. Chelsea turned to the specific exclusion clause, her voice carrying the weight of legal finality. Andrew Mitchell, spouse, is permanently excluded from all marital property claims related to these assets due to failure to provide emotional support during childbirth. The color drained from Andrew's face. You can't be serious. There's no way that's legally binding. Oh, but it is, Chelsea said, holding up the notarized documents. Your father-in-law was a lawyer, remember? He knew exactly how to structure this to be ironclad. Ella leaned forward, her voice shaking. What about the rest of us? Penelope? Violet? All excluded, I said, watching their world crumble in real time. Every single person who couldn't be bothered to show up today. Every person who treated my pregnancy like an inconvenience. You're all locked out. Andrew began pacing, his hands running through his hair. This is insane. You can't just cut family out like this. I didn't cut anyone out, I said calmly. You cut yourselves out. Every missed appointment, every dismissive comment, every time you made me feel like I was asking too much for basic support. You were writing your own exclusion. The implications began hitting them in waves. Andrew realized that his dreams of financial security had just evaporated. Ella understood that her family's expectations of inheritance were gone. The baby they'd all hoped would disappear was now the heir to a fortune they'd never known existed. The property, Andrew stammered. The company shares. That's generational wealth. Yes, I agreed. James's generation. Ella tried one more desperate appeal. Surely there's some way to contest this. Family court's favor. Nothing, Chelsea interrupted, consulting the documents. The trust is specifically designed to prevent any legal challenges. Your father-in-law spent months with estate attorneys making this bulletproof. Andrew slumped against the wall, the weight of his choices finally crushing him. For 9 months he'd treated my pregnancy like a burden, my needs like demands, my fears like drama. Now, staring at the legal proof of his father-in-law's protection, he understood the true cost of his indifference. All you had to do was be here, I said softly. All any of you had to do was care enough to show up. The room fell silent except for James's soft breathing and the distant sounds of hospital life. Andrew opened his mouth to speak, then closed it, apparently realizing there were no words that could undo the past 14 hours. Alice stared at her wilted flowers, understanding finally that her excuses and apologies were worthless currency in this new reality. For the first time in months, the silence belonged to me. It wasn't the lonely quiet of abandonment. It was the powerful silence of justice served, of protection activated, of a father's love reaching beyond death to shield his daughter from those who had never deserved her. The game had indeed gone into overtime. But this time I had won. The hospital room had fallen into an uncomfortable stillness, with Andrew slumped against the wall and Ella clutching her wilted flowers like a life preserver. I was carefully placing the legal documents back into the silver box when Chelsea's fingers caught on something unusual. Wait, she murmured, her brow furrowing as she examined the box's interior. There's something else here. Her fingertips traced along the burgundy velvet lining, finding a slight bulge near the corner. With gentle pressure, she managed to peel back a hidden flap in the fabric, revealing a secret compartment my father had designed with the precision of someone who understood the importance of insurance. What is it? I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. Chelsea extracted a slim envelope, much smaller than the first, with no identifying marks or legal seals. Just plain white paper that felt somehow heavier than the million-dollar documents we'd just finished reading. There's more, she whispered, her voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Andrew straightened against the wall, his attention suddenly sharp. More what? I ignored him, focusing entirely on the envelope in Chelsea's hands. Something about its simplicity made it seem more dangerous than all the legal papers combined. This wasn't about money or property. This felt personal. Chelsea opened it carefully, revealing what appeared to be printed screenshots of text messages. The phone numbers were blocked out, but the names at the top of each conversation thread made my stomach clench with recognition. These are... I started, then stopped, my throat closing as I read the first exchange. Penelope's name appeared above a series of messages dated throughout my pregnancy. Her words, preserved in digital amber, laid bare the calculated cruelty I'd sensed but never been able to prove. She's getting too comfortable with this pregnancy thing, one message read. Someone needs to reality check her before she gets completely delusional. The response came from a number labeled AM. Andrew's initials. What do you suggest? Push her. Hard. Make her question everything. If she's going to fall apart, better it happens before the baby comes. Chelsea's hand trembled as she held the papers. How did your father get these? I thought about the private investigator mentioned in his letter, the man who'd confirmed everyone had received notification of my labor. Apparently, his surveillance had gone much deeper than just tracking attendance. The next screenshot showed Andrew's response. Good thinking. If she breaks before the baby, I keep everything. Clean slate. The words hit me like ice water, each letter crystallizing the suspicions I'd tried so hard to dismiss. There it was, in his own words. The hope that I would crumble, that the pregnancy would destroy me, that he could emerge from the wreckage with his freedom intact. No child, no drama, his next message read. Back to the way things were. Ella gasped from her chair, apparently reading over my shoulder. Andrew, you didn't actually. Shut up. He snapped, his face flushing red with embarrassment and rage. Those messages are taken out of context. What context? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. What context makes hoping your wife has a breakdown acceptable? More screenshots revealed the scope of their conspiracy. Violet had contributed her own suggestions. Cancel plans when she needs support. Make her feel isolated. Zach had added, question every decision she makes. Call it concern. Even my mother appeared in the exchanges, her number showing messages that made my chest ache with a different kind of betrayal. She's always been dramatic. This pregnancy is just making it worse. Don't enable her. The evidence painted a picture of systematic emotional manipulation, a coordinated effort to undermine my confidence and push me toward a breaking point that would have benefited everyone except me and my baby. You planned this, I said, looking directly at Andrew. All of it. The dismissals, the isolation, the constant questioning of my feelings. You actually strategized how to break me. He pushed himself off the wall, his hands clenched into fists. You're twisting everything. Those were just frustrations. Venting to family. Venting. Chelsea stood up, her protective instincts flaring. This is a blueprint for psychological abuse. The final screenshot was the most damning. A group chat that included everyone who should have been at the hospital today, discussing their collective decision to skip my labor. Let her do it alone, Penelope had written. Maybe she'll finally understand she's in over her head. Andrew's response, agreed. Natural consequences. Ella had contributed. If she can't handle labor without constant support, how's she going to handle motherhood? Even Arya, whose children Andrew doted on, had chimed in. Some people need to learn the hard way. I stared at the evidence of their coordinated cruelty, feeling something shift inside me like tectonic plates finally settling into place. The gaslighting, the dismissals, the constant undermining. It hadn't been in my head. It had been real, planned, deliberate. You gambled on me falling apart, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. You bet that pregnancy would break me, that labor would destroy me, that I'd prove myself unfit to be a mother. Andrew's face had gone pale, his earlier confidence evaporating as he realized the implications of having his conspiracy documented and legally preserved. But here's what you didn't count on, I continued, gathering the screenshots with steady hands. You didn't count on my father seeing through all of you. You didn't count on me being stronger than your worst expectations. And you definitely didn't count on your cruelty being rewarded with permanent exile from everything you thought you'd inherit. The room fell silent except for James's soft breathing. Looking at these messages, I realized I didn't need to scream or rage or demand explanations. The validation I'd spent months seeking was right here in black and white. Proof that my pain had been intentional, my isolation manufactured, my fears dismissed by design. But rather than devastating me, the evidence felt like liberation. Every doubt I'd harbored about my own perceptions dissolved. Every moment I'd questioned whether I was being too sensitive or dramatic was reframed as justified intuition. I stood slowly, my body still tender from labor but my spirit stronger than it had been in months. Chelsea, help me pack James's things. Where are you going? Andrew demanded, panic creeping into his voice. Somewhere you're not, I replied simply. I gathered the few personal items I'd brought to the hospital, folding them around the silver box like treasure. Chelsea helped me navigate the discharge paperwork while Andrew and Ella sat in stunned silence, apparently processing the full scope of their exposure. As I prepared to leave, cradling James against my chest, I looked back at Andrew one final time. He sat slouched in the visitor's chair, his phone dangling uselessly in his hands, the same device he'd used to coordinate my emotional destruction. The house keys, I said, extending my hand. What? My father's property. My name on the deed. Your conspiracies documented and witnessed. Hand over the keys to what was never really yours. He fumbled in his pocket, producing our house keys with shaking fingers. As they dropped into my palm, I felt the weight of my new reality. Financially independent, legally protected, and finally free from people who had never deserved my trust. I walked out of that hospital room without looking back, carrying my son and my strength into a future they would never be able to touch. Chelsea's guest bedroom became a sanctuary I never knew I needed. The pale yellow walls caught the morning sunlight just right, filtering it into something gentle and warm that made James's skin glow like honey. For 3 months, this became our world. Quiet feedings at 2 a.m., soft lullabies hummed while folding tiny clothes, morning walks where James would stare wide-eyed at leaves rustling overhead. He's getting so big, Chelsea whispered one evening, watching James grip her finger with surprising strength. Look at those cheeks. I smiled, feeling a contentment I'd forgotten was possible. Here, in this cocoon of friendship and protection, I could simply be a mother. No judgment, no manipulation, no constant questioning of my instincts. Just the pure joy of watching my son discover the world one day at a time. The outside world, however, refused to stay quiet. My phone buzzed constantly with messages I refused to read. Andrew's contact appeared on my screen so frequently that Chelsea finally suggested blocking him entirely. But something perverse in me wanted to witness his unraveling, to watch him scramble for what he'd thrown away so carelessly. His voicemails started desperately cheerful. Hey babe, just checking in. Hope you and the little guy are doing well. Call me back when you get a chance. Within a week, the tone shifted to panic. This is getting ridiculous. You can't just disappear with my son. We need to talk about this like adults. By the 3rd week, he'd moved into full-blown pleading. I know I messed up, okay? I get it. But this silent treatment isn't helping anyone. James needs his father. I deleted each message without listening to the end, but Chelsea caught fragments when they played too loudly. She'd shake her head, muttering things about audacity and too little too late. Social media became Andrew's new battlefield. He posted carefully curated photos from our early relationship. Romantic dinners, vacation snapshots. Images that painted him as the devoted boyfriend he'd never actually been. The captions grew increasingly desperate. Missing my beautiful family today. Can't wait to hold my son again. #blessed, #dadlife, #family first. Friends who knew the truth began commenting with confusion and concern. Sarah from my old job wrote, "Wait, isn't your wife staying with Chelsea? Are you guys okay?" The post disappeared within an hour. Ella proved to be Andrew's most pathetic ambassador. She arrived at Chelsea's door on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, clutching a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies and wearing an expression of manufactured remorse. "She's here," Chelsea announced, peering through the blinds. "With baked goods." "Let me guess," I said, not looking up from where James was practicing tummy time on his play mat. "Cookies and crocodile tears?" Chelsea opened the door just wide enough to be polite. "Can I help you?" "I need to talk to her," Ella said, her voice thick with emotion. "Please. I brought James some cookies. Well, for when he's older, obviously. I need her to know how sorry I am." "She's not interested in apologies," Chelsea replied smoothly. "But I'll take the cookies. James will appreciate them when he's ready for solid food." Chelsea, please. I know we messed up, but we're family. Family forgives each other. Family shows up, Chelsea said simply and closed the door. Through the window, I watched Ella stand on the porch for several minutes, her shoulders shaking with what might have been sobs. Eventually, she walked back to her car, her heels clicking mournfully against the wet pavement. You didn't have to do that, I told Chelsea later. Yes, I did. You're not ready and she doesn't deserve your energy. Meanwhile, Penelope launched her own campaign of damage control throughout their social circle. According to mutual friends who still spoke to me, she was spinning an elaborate narrative about my postpartum instability and dramatic overreaction to normal family dynamics. She's always been sensitive, Penelope apparently told anyone who would listen. The pregnancy hormones just made it worse. She'll come around once she realizes she's being unreasonable. But the will had become public knowledge among the extended family, and Penelope's attempts at controlling the narrative fell flat. People weren't buying her version of events when there was legal documentation proving systematic abandonment during childbirth. Marcus, Andrew's cousin, called to check on me directly. I don't know what they were thinking, he said during a brief conversation. My wife would have murdered me if I'd missed our daughter's birth for a basketball game. These small validations from unexpected sources reminded me that my father's protective instincts had been right. Not everyone was like Andrew's family. Not everyone would have abandoned me when I needed them most. As spring turned to summer, my strength returned in waves. The physical recovery from childbirth was nothing compared to the emotional healing that came from being surrounded by genuine care. James thrived in the peaceful environment, his smiles coming earlier and more frequently than the baby books predicted. I think it's time, I told Chelsea one morning in July, watching James giggle at his reflection in a mirror toy. Time for what? To go home. Chelsea studied my face carefully. Are you sure? You can stay here as long as you need. I know. But it's my house now. My father's house. I shouldn't let them keep me away from what belongs to me and James. The decision felt right in a way that surprised me. I wasn't running back because I'd forgiven them or because I needed them. I was returning because I was ready to claim my space as the woman I'd become. Financially independent, emotionally strong, and completely clear about my own worth. The morning of our return, I dressed James in the outfit my father would have loved. A tiny button-down shirt with small sailboats printed on it. I put on my favorite sundress, the one that made me feel confident and beautiful, and drove to the house with Chelsea following behind for moral support. Andrew's car was in the driveway. Of course it was. He'd probably been monitoring Chelsea's house, waiting for signs of our return. I walked through the front door like I was stepping onto my own land because the deed was in my name, the mortgage paid in full by my father's planning, every legal document confirming my ownership. Andrew stood in the living room, his clothes wrinkled like he'd been sleeping in them. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate, his usual confidence completely absent. He opened his mouth to speak, then seemed to think better of it. Words had gotten him into this mess. Maybe he was finally learning their limitations. Ella appeared from the kitchen, tears already streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, she began, but I held up my hand. I'm not here for apologies, I said calmly. I'm here because this is my home. The dynamic shift was immediate and unmistakable. Andrew, who had spent months dismissing my needs, suddenly hung on my every word. Ella, who had criticized my readiness for motherhood, now offered to help with anything I needed. I could make dinner, Andrew suggested hesitantly. Whatever you want. Laundry needs to be done, Ella added quickly. I could take care of that. I looked at them both, these people who had conspired to break me, now desperate to serve me, and felt nothing but cool detachment. Their panic wasn't my responsibility. Their regret wasn't my burden to ease. Fine, I said simply, settling into my favorite chair with James on my lap. From that day forward, the house operated by new rules. Rules I didn't need to state because my father's will had stated them clearly enough. Andrew cooked meals and cleaned dishes without being asked. Ella folded laundry and organized closets as if seeking absolution through domestic service. Penelope stopped visiting entirely after her first awkward encounter with the new reality. She'd swept in with her usual commanding presence, only to be met with my complete indifference to her opinions. You can't keep this up forever, she'd said. This cold shoulder act isn't sustainable. I'm not acting, I'd replied, not looking up from feeding James. This is just who I am now. She'd left within 10 minutes and hadn't returned since. Now James crawls across floors that belong to us both. He'll grow up in this house knowing he's the heir to his grandfather's love and protection. He'll never doubt his worth or question whether he deserves to take up space. Me. I don't ask for respect anymore. I carry it with me like armor my father forged from his own wisdom. The silence that once isolated me now empowers me, a quiet strength that speaks louder than their desperate attempts at redemption ever could. If this story of justice and empowerment had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when the mysterious silver box revealed her father's protective plan, changing everything in an instant. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more incredible stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.